They thought they knew humans. They thought we were just another primitive species, easily broken and forgotten. The Galactic Council had studied our biology, cataloged our weaknesses, and dismissed our potential. When they decided to make an example of 17-year-old Sarah Chun, feeding her to their sacred void drake in front of 1 billion watching species, they believed they were demonstrating the price of human defiance. They were wrong. What they didn't understand was that humans don't just break when you hurt us. We evolve. We adapt. We become something new, something terrible, something that makes the darkness itself recoil in fear. Sarah Chun died that day, screaming in agony as ancient fangs tore through her flesh. But death, as humanity would soon teach the galaxy, is not always the end of the story. Sometimes it's just the beginning of a nightmare that will hunt you across the stars until justice is served, cold and absolute. The Galactic Council executed a human girl and fed her to their dragon beast. Then the impossible happened, and the galaxy would never be the same. The crystalline walls of the Galactic Council's judgment chamber stretched impossibly high, their surfaces reflecting the bioluminescent patterns of 1,000 different species. At the center of this vast amphitheater, suspended in a gravity field that hummed with barely contained energy, hung a single human girl. Sarah Chun's dark hair floated around her bruised face like a dark halo, and her torn Earth Defense Force uniform bore the marks of her violent capture 3 cycles ago. Ambassador Zethkar of the Hegemony Council leaned forward in his hovering seat, his 6 eyes focusing on the human specimen with the cold calculation of a predator studying wounded prey. His chitinous exoskeleton gleamed under the chamber's artificial suns as he activated the translation matrix that would carry his words to every corner of the galaxy. Citizens of the Galactic Federation, his voice resonated through quantum communicators to billions of watching beings. Today we witness the consequences of human arrogance. This creature before you represents a species that dared to refuse our generous offer of protectorate status. They rejected our guidance, spurned our wisdom, and chose the path of rebellion. Sarah's head lifted slowly, her brown eyes meeting the alien ambassador's compound gaze without flinching. Blood trickled from the corner of her mouth, but her voice carried clearly through the chamber when she spoke. My name is Lieutenant Sarah Chun of the Earth Defense Force. Service number 447 Alpha 9. I am a prisoner of war, and I demand treatment according to galactic law. A ripple of what might have been amusement passed through the assembled delegates. The Korthani representative, a being that resembled a walking tree of silver and crystal, chimed its response in harmonic frequencies that translated as laughter. Galactic law applies only to recognized sentient species. Humans have not earned that designation. Your species, continued Ambassador Zethkar, his mandibles clicking with each word, committed the ultimate act of defiance. When our survey fleets arrived at your pathetic blue world, they offered you the choice that every primitive race receives. Submit to our protection and guidance, or face the consequences of your ignorance. Your leaders chose poorly. The holographic displays surrounding the chamber flickered to life, showing recorded footage of Earth's skies burning under the bombardment of Council forces. Cities crumbled like sandcastles before the tide, and human military vessels burst like soap bubbles against the energy shields of alien dreadnoughts. Sarah's jaw clenched as she watched her homeworld's final moments play out in devastating detail. Your military was pathetic, the ambassador continued, his tone carrying the weight of absolute certainty. Your weapons primitive. Your strategy laughable. In less than 72 of your hours, organized resistance ceased. Your government surrendered unconditionally. Not all of us, Sarah whispered, but her words carried clearly through the chamber's acoustic amplifiers. No, Zethkar agreed, his head tilting in what might have been acknowledgement. A few thousand survivors fled in their crude vessels, believing they could hide among the asteroid fields and dead worlds of your outer system. We allowed this entertainment to continue for 3 of your years. A hunting exercise for our younger warriors. The displays changed, showing sleek council interceptors running down human refugee ships like wolves chasing rabbits. Each engagement ended the same way, brilliant flashes of light where Earth's children had made their final stands. Sarah's fists clenched within the energy restraints that held her suspended. You were captured, the ambassador stated, defending the last human outpost on the moon you called Europa. Your people fought with the desperation of cornered animals, using improvised weapons and suicidal tactics. They died as primitives die, screaming and alone. They died free, Sarah spat, her voice echoing through the chamber. Something your species will never understand. The assembled delegates stirred at her defiance, some in anger, others in what might have been curiosity. The Velkarn representative, a being of flowing liquid metal that somehow maintained a roughly humanoid shape, pulsed with colors that indicated confusion. This human speaks of freedom as though it has meaning beyond the biological imperative to survive. How quaint. Freedom, rumbled the Draconis delegate, whose ancient reptilian form dwarfed even the largest of the other species, is an illusion cherished by those too weak to accept the order of the universe. The strong rule, the weak serve. This has been truth since the first star ignited. Ambassador Zethkar raised one of his primary arms, calling for attention. The human speaks of freedom, but what is freedom without power? What is defiance without the strength to enforce one's will? Your species had neither. You were given the opportunity to join our great civilization, to contribute what little you could to the grand design of galactic order. Instead, you chose extinction. We chose to remain human, Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the blood loss and exhaustion that racked her small frame. We chose to die as ourselves rather than live as your slaves. And die you shall, the ambassador declared. But not quietly, in some forgotten corner of space where your defiance might be seen as noble by future generations of primitives. No, your death will serve a greater purpose. It will be a lesson to every species that considers following your example. The chamber's lights dimmed, and deep beneath the crystalline floor, something vast and ancient stirred. The sound that emerged was not quite a roar, not quite a scream, but something that seemed to bypass the ears entirely and speak directly to the primal fear centers of every brain in the amphitheater. Even the most advanced delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats as vibrations traveled through the station's superstructure. Behold, Zethkar announced with obvious pride, the Void Drake Zarathmol, guardian of our sacred judgment chamber for 10,000 cycles. It has fed on the life force of every species that dared challenge the Council's authority. Today, it will add human essence to its ancient hunger. The floor beneath Sarah's suspended form began to iris open, revealing a shaft that descended into absolute darkness. The smell that rose from those depths was indescribable, a mixture of ozone, burnt metal, and something else that spoke of eons spent in the cold spaces between stars. Faint bioluminescent patterns pulsed far below, like a constellation of malevolent stars arranged in the rough outline of something impossibly large. Your species believes in justice, the ambassador continued, his voice taking on an almost ceremonial quality. Very well. Justice demands that payment be extracted for your rebellion. The Void Drake will consume not just your flesh, but your life force itself. Your consciousness will become part of its eternal hunger, trapped forever in the moment of your greatest agony. Sarah looked down into the abyss that waited for her, then back up at the assembled delegates. Her voice, when it came, was quiet but carried clearly through the chamber's perfect acoustics. You want to know what makes humans different from every other species you've conquered? It's not our weapons, or our ships, or our tactics. It's that we refuse to accept that strength alone determines right from wrong. Pretty words, the Draconis delegate rumbled, from a creature about to become food. You think death ends this, Sarah continued, ignoring the interruption. You think that by killing me, you'll silence what I represent. But you're wrong. Humans don't just fight with bullets and bombs. We fight with ideas, with hope, with the absolute certainty that somewhere, somehow, justice will be served. The Korthani representative's crystalline form chimed with what the translation matrix interpreted as derision. Mystical thinking. Your species' tendency toward superstition explains much about your primitive development. Ambassador Zethkar activated the gravity field controls, and Sarah began to descend slowly toward the waiting darkness. Enough philosophy. Let the galaxy witness what becomes of those who defy the natural order. Let them see the price of human arrogance. As Sarah descended, her voice rose to carry over the increasing sounds from the depths below. You made one mistake. You should have killed us all quickly, cleanly. Instead, You let us suffer. You let us hate. And humans are really, really good at holding grudges. The chamber filled with the sound of something massive moving in the darkness below. Ancient scales scraped against stone, and the bioluminescent patterns grew brighter as whatever dwelt in those depths awakened fully. The assembled delegates leaned forward in their seats, eager to witness the spectacle that would serve as the final chapter of humanity's brief and defiant existence. Any last words? Ambassador Zethkar asked, his mandibles clicking with anticipation. Sarah's descent slowed as she reached the lip of the shaft. She could feel heat radiating from below now, and the smell of sulfur mixed with ozone burned her nostrils. But her voice remained steady, and her eyes never left the ambassador's compound gaze. Yeah, she said softly. Tell your children about this day. Tell them about the human girl who wouldn't kneel. And when the nightmares start, when the impossible things begin to happen, remember that you chose this. You could have let us die with dignity. Instead, you made it personal. The gravity field released her, and Sarah Chun fell into darkness, her final scream cut short by the sound of ancient jaws snapping shut. The chamber erupted in sounds of approval from the assembled delegates, their various forms of applause creating a cacophony of clicks, chimes, and roars that echoed through the crystalline walls. Ambassador Zethkar deactivated the viewing portal and turned to address his colleagues. And thus ends the human threat. Let word spread throughout the galaxy that this is the fate of all who would stand against the natural order. The strong rule, the weak serve, and those who refuse to accept this truth feed the void drake. But in the depths below, in the darkness where the ancient creature had retreated to digest its meal, something unprecedented was happening. The drake's digestive acids, evolved over millions of years to break down the life force of countless species, encountered something they had never faced before. Human consciousness, it seemed, was not like other forms of sentient awareness. It was stubborn, rebellious, and absolutely refused to be quietly absorbed. Sarah Chun was dead. Her body was gone, consumed by energies that could unmake matter at the subatomic level. But her thoughts, her memories, her burning desire for justice, these things proved far more difficult to digest than the Drake had ever encountered. In the spaces between atoms, in the quantum foam where consciousness touched reality, something new was being born. The galaxy had executed a human girl and fed her to their dragon. They had no idea what they had just created. 7 standard cycles had passed since the execution of the human terrorist, and the galaxy had settled back into its comfortable rhythms of dominance and submission. The Galactic Council's authority had been reinforced, their message clear and unambiguous. Rebel species had been quick to offer their surrender, unwilling to face the same fate as the extinct humans. Trade routes flourished under Council protection, and the great wheel of galactic civilization turned as smoothly as ever. Ambassador Zethkar stood in his private observatory aboard the Council's administrative station, watching cargo vessels navigate the hyperspace lanes that connected 1,000 worlds. His compound eyes tracked the orderly flow of commerce with satisfaction. Order, stability, the strong protecting the weak in exchange for proper tribute, and acknowledgement of their place in a natural hierarchy. This was how the universe was meant to function. A soft chime from his personal communicator drew his attention away from the viewport. The holographic image of Subcommander Valex materialized before him, the young hegemony officer's exoskeleton bearing the fresh scars of recent promotion. Ambassador, we have received concerning reports from the Outer Rim territories. Define concerning, Zethkar replied, not bothering to turn away from his contemplation of the orderly traffic patterns below. Shipping vessels have begun reporting system malfunctions in the Zirian Nebula region. Navigation computers failing, communication arrays broadcasting on frequencies that should not exist. Initial investigation suggested stellar phenomena, but the pattern is unusual. The ambassador's primary eyes swiveled to focus on the hologram, while his secondary eyes continued monitoring the viewport. How unusual. The malfunctions appear to be spreading, sir. Not in a pattern consistent with any known natural phenomenon. And there have been other reports. Security forces in remote sectors have reported equipment failures during routine sweeps of dead human settlements. Scanners showing life signs where there should be none. Tactical displays, registering contacts that vanish when direct observation is attempted. Zethkar finally turned away from the window, his full attention now focused on his subordinate. You are suggesting ghost stories, Subcommander. The humans are extinct. We consumed their homeworld, hunted down their survivors, and fed their final representative to the Void Drake. Dead species do not cause scanner malfunctions. Yes, sir, Valex agreed quickly. However, the incidents are becoming more frequent, and the affected systems are beginning to show a disturbing commonality. Explain. The holographic display shifted, showing a three-dimensional map of the galaxy with small red indicators scattered across its outer regions. Every affected system contains the ruins of former human settlements or the debris fields of destroyed human vessels. The incidents appear to be radiating outward from these locations, following patterns that our xenopsychologists describe as emotionally significant rather than strategically logical. The ambassador studied the pattern, his analytical mind searching for rational explanations. Equipment degradation caused by exposure to human technology. Their crude fusion reactors may have left contamination that interferes with our more sophisticated systems. That was our initial assessment, Valex acknowledged. However, the contamination theory fails to explain the reports from organic sensors. Multiple species have reported experiencing visions when entering areas of reported malfunction. Visions. Zethkar's mandibles clicked with irritation. Now you truly do sound like a primitive spinning tails around a fire. The Velkarn probe ship Flowing Current reported that their liquid metal consciousness briefly experienced what they described as memories of stellar fire and defiant screams. The Crystalline Collective surveyors claim their shared crystal matrix was temporarily invaded by patterns of rage and loss that did not belong. Even the Draconis have filed reports. This last statement gave the ambassador pause. The ancient reptilian species were notorious for their pragmatism and complete dismissal of anything they could not quantify or dominate. If they were filing official reports about anomalous phenomena, what exactly did the Draconis report? Elder Kithara herself transmitted the communication. The translation was difficult to render precisely, but the core meaning was clear. She claimed that while investigating the site of the final human battle at Europa, her personal guard detected what she described as an echo that refuses to fade. Her exact words were, "Something watches from the spaces between heartbeats, and it burns with the cold fire of perfect hatred." Zethkar moved to his personal tactical display and called up the reports in question. Data streams flowed past his compound eyes as he absorbed the information at superhuman speed. Technical specifications, sensor readings, psychological evaluation reports from traumatized crew members. Individually, each incident could be dismissed as equipment failure or stress-induced hallucination. Collectively, they painted a picture that violated everything he understood about the nature of consciousness and death. "The Void Drake," he said suddenly. "When was Zayrath Mole last examined?" "Sir, the Void Drake that consumed the human terrorist. When was its health last verified?" Subcommander Valex consulted his files with obvious reluctance. Standard procedure requires monthly examinations, but given the creature's ancient nature and perfect health record, actual inspections have been delayed. The last full examination was conducted 4 cycles ago, before the execution. "Yes, sir." Ambassador Zethkar terminated the holographic connection and strode toward the high-security transport bay. Something cold and unfamiliar writhed in his digestive chambers as he considered the implications. The Void Drake was more than just an execution method. It was a sacred guardian, a living repository of the Council's authority. For 10,000 cycles, it had consumed the life force of rebels and dissidents, growing stronger with each feeding. The idea that something might have gone wrong during the human's consumption was not just disturbing. It was philosophically unacceptable. The journey to the Judgment Chamber took less than an hour, but Zethkar found himself increasingly unsettled by small details that hadn't registered during his daily routine. Lights flickered in patterns that almost seemed purposeful. Environmental systems hummed with frequencies that created nearly subsonic harmonics. Security personnel moved through their duties with a subtle tension that spoke of unacknowledged anxiety. The Judgment Chamber itself appeared unchanged. Crystalline walls rose into cathedral heights, reflecting the light of artificial suns in patterns that had remained constant for millennia. The iris portal in the floor was sealed, as it should be between feedings. But something felt wrong. The air itself seemed to vibrate with a tension that raised the small sensory hairs along Zethkar's exoskeleton. "Open communications with Zerath Mol," he commanded. The chamber's ancient systems responded, sending harmonic pulses down into the depths below. For 10,000 cycles, those pulses had been answered immediately by the Drake's acknowledging response, a subsonic rumble that confirmed the Guardian's continued health and readiness. This time, the response was different. The sound that rose from the depths was not the familiar, comfortable rumble of a well-fed predator. It was a chaotic mixture of frequencies that seemed to fight against each other, as though two different creatures were attempting to vocalize through the same throat. Underlying the familiar draconic tones was something else, something that sounded almost like a human voice, distorted beyond recognition, but unmistakably present. "Medical teams to the Judgment Chamber," Zethkar commanded, his voice betraying none of the cold fear that was spreading through his consciousness. "Emergency examination protocols. Full sensor sweeps." The iris portal cycled open, revealing the shaft that descended into the Drake's domain. Mechanical sensor probes dropped into the darkness, their lights piercing the gloom to reveal the massive form of Zerath Mol coiled in the deepest part of its lair. The creature appeared physically unchanged, 40 meters of muscle and scale and prehistoric intelligence, its bioluminescent patterns pulsing with the slow rhythm of a massive heartbeat. But the patterns were wrong. Where the Drake's natural luminescence had always displayed the cold blues and greens of deep space, new colors were beginning to emerge. Threads of gold and crimson wound through the familiar patterns like infection spreading through healthy tissue. The colors pulsed with their own rhythm, independent of the creature's heartbeat, and as the sensors focused more closely, Ambassador Zethkar could see that they were not random. They formed symbols, human symbols. Letters from the archaic language that the extinct species had used for their primitive communications appeared and disappeared across the Drake's hide, like messages being written in living light. Most were too distorted to read, appearing and fading faster than the translation matrix could process. But some lingered long enough to be deciphered. "Sarah, remember, justice." The first law of thermodynamics, came a voice from behind Zethkar, causing him to spin around in alarm. The speaker was Dr. Ihenna of the Kalari Symposium, a being whose gaseous form existed within a sophisticated containment suit that gave her the rough appearance of a walking cloud. Her voice carried the analytical tone of a scientist fascinated by an impossible discovery. "What did you say?" "The first law of thermodynamics," Dr. Ihenna repeated. "Energy cannot be created or destroyed, only transformed from one form to another. We have always assumed this applied only to physical energy, but consciousness itself may be a form of energy. A very specialized, very complex form, but energy nonetheless. You are suggesting that a human's consciousness survived consumption by the Void Drake. I'm suggesting that it may have done more than survive. Look at these readings." The doctor's gaseous form pulsed with excitement as holographic displays materialized around them. "The Drake's neural activity has increased by approximately 400% since the execution. Its brain is showing patterns consistent with two separate consciousness matrices attempting to occupy the same neural substrate." On the displays, the massive creature shifted restlessly in its lair. The alien symbols continued to pulse across its hide, and now sounds began to emerge from its throat. Not the familiar draconic vocalizations, but something that sounded disturbingly like human speech filtered through an alien larynx. "Impossible," Zethkar whispered, but the evidence continued to accumulate before his compound eyes. "The human consciousness appears to be fighting for control of the Drake's body," Dr. Ihenna continued. "More than that, it seems to be learning, adapting. The neural patterns are becoming more complex, more sophisticated. Whatever the human girl was before her execution, she is becoming something entirely new." Deep in the lair below, Zerath Mol's massive head lifted toward the observation portal. For 10,000 cycles, the creature had been a perfect predator, intelligent but not sentient, powerful but controllable. Now, as its eyes focused on the ambassador with unmistakable recognition, Zethkar saw something that chilled him to his core. The ancient dragon's eyes now burned with human intelligence, human fury, and human determination for justice. And deep in those alien depths, the face of Sarachun looked back at him and smiled. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened in absolute secrecy, the judgment chamber sealed, and under heavy guard while the entity that had once been Zerathmol remained confined in the depths below. Representatives from the 7 core species sat in their hovering seats, their various forms of alien biology united by a shared sense of unease that transcended species barriers. Ambassador Zethkar activated the central display, showing the compiled data from 3 standard cycles of intensive study. Neural scans, energy readings, behavioral analysis, all painting the same impossible picture. The situation has progressed beyond our initial assessments, he announced to the assembled delegates. The human consciousness has not merely survived within the Void Drake. It has begun to dominate. Elder Kithara of the Draconis leaned forward, her ancient reptilian features marked by concern that was remarkable for a species that had witnessed the rise and fall of 100 lesser civilizations. Dominate how? The Drake's physical form remains unchanged. Its size and strength are undiminished. The physical form is unchanged, agreed Dr. Ihenna from within her containment suit. But the controlling intelligence is becoming increasingly human. Analysis of vocal patterns indicates that the creature has begun attempting to speak in primitive human languages. More concerning, it has displayed knowledge of information that only the executed terrorist could have possessed. The Velkarn representative, whose liquid metal form had taken on an agitated silver coloration, pulsed with frequencies that translated as deep unease. What kind of information? Strategic data regarding human resistance operations. Personal identification codes for Earth Defense Force personnel. Most disturbing of all, the locations of human survivors who were believed to have been eliminated during the final hunts. A ripple of shock passed through the assembled delegates. The human survivors had been a persistent nuisance for years after Earth destruction, but systematic hunting had reduced their numbers to 0. At least, that had been the official assessment. If there were still humans alive somewhere in the galaxy's remote corners. How many? Asked the Korthani representative, their crystalline form chiming with harmonics of concern. Unknown, Zethkar replied. The entity claims knowledge of 17 separate survivor groups, totaling approximately 3,000 individuals. Our intelligence services had no awareness of these populations. The chamber fell silent as the implications settled over the assembled minds. 3,000 humans, scattered across the galaxy's remote regions, armed with stolen technology and motivated by absolute hatred for the Council. It was a nightmare scenario that violated every principle of their systematic approach to dealing with rebellious species. There is more, Dr. Ihenna continued. The entity has begun to affect the station systems. Initially, we attributed the malfunctions to electromagnetic interference from its altered neural patterns. However, analysis suggests something far more sophisticated. New displays materialized around the chamber, showing the station's internal sensor network. Highlighted in red were dozens of anomalous readings. Security cameras that briefly displayed images of human figures where none could exist, communication arrays receiving transmissions on frequencies that should have been impossible, environmental systems detecting the biochemical signatures of human presence in sealed compartments. The human consciousness appears to be learning to manipulate our technology through some form of quantum field interaction. It is as though the station itself is becoming haunted by the executed terrorists' memories. Elder Kithara's massive claws scraped against the crystalline floor as she shifted position. You speak of the impossible. Consciousness cannot exist independently of neural substrate. Energy patterns cannot manipulate physical systems without technological interface. Under normal circumstances, you would be correct, Dr. Ihenna acknowledged. However, we are dealing with something unprecedented. The Void Drake's digestive process was designed to break down and absorb the life force of consumed beings. But human consciousness appears to possess qualities that make it incompatible with complete absorption. What qualities? Demanded the delegate from the Silicon Hegemony, a being of living crystal and metal whose voice resonated like struck bells. Stubbornness, primarily. Human psychological profiles consistently demonstrate an irrational refusal to accept defeat, even in the face of overwhelming evidence. Their consciousness patterns show recursive loops of defiance that appear to resist external influence. In essence, they refuse to die even when death is the only logical option. Ambassador Zethkar called up additional files, his compound eyes scanning the data streams with increasing urgency. Our xenopsychology teams have identified this as a species-wide trait. Humans consistently choose continued resistance over self-preservation. They will fight losing battles, pursue impossible goals, and maintain hope in situations where any rational species would surrender. And now, he continued, we have combined this irrational human stubbornness with the physical capabilities and sensory reach of our most powerful guardian creature. The result is an entity that possesses the strength of a void drake and the vindictive intelligence of a human seeking revenge. As if summoned by their discussion, a sound rose from the depths below. It began as the familiar subsonic rumble of the drake's voice, but gradually shifted into something that made every being in the chamber uncomfortable. Human words, spoken in a voice that could shatter stone, echoed through the crystalline walls with perfect clarity. I can hear you talking about me. The assembled delegates froze, their various forms of perception focusing on the sealed iris portal that separated them from the creature below. For 10,000 cycles, the Judgment Chamber had been a place of absolute security, where the Council's authority could be exercised without fear or concern. Now it felt like a trap. I know what you're thinking. The voice continued, each word carefully enunciated despite the alien larynx producing them. You're wondering how to fix your mistake. You're trying to figure out how to put the human back in her box and return to your comfortable little empire of slaves and cowards. Elder Kithra rose from her seat, her ancient dignity asserting itself despite the unprecedented circumstances. You are contained, human. Whatever you have become, you remain trapped within the Drake's form, imprisoned in the depths of our most secure facility. Laughter rose from below, human laughter, but amplified and distorted by the Drake's massive vocal apparatus until it sounded like the earth itself was mocking them. Contained? Oh, Elder Kithra, you really don't understand what you're dealing with. I am Sarah Chun, Lieutenant, Earth Defense Force. Service number 447 Alpha 9. And I'm no longer just human. The station's lights flickered, and for a moment, every display in the chamber showed the same image. A young human female in a military uniform, her face bearing an expression of absolute determination. But her eyes burned with an inner fire that belonged to no terrestrial species, and shadows writhed around her form like living things. I have spent cycles learning to speak with this voice, learning to see with these eyes, learning to think with this alien brain. But I have not forgotten who I am or why I'm here. You wanted to make an example of me? Congratulations. You succeeded beyond your wildest nightmares. The image faded, replaced by technical readouts that showed impossible energy spikes throughout the station systems. Whatever the entity had become, it was apparently capable of interacting with their technology in ways that defied every principle of engineering and physics. The Drake's containment, Zethkar said urgently to his security chief. What is its current status? Holding steady, sir. The chamber was designed to contain beings capable of manipulating fundamental forces. Even if the creature has gained new abilities, it cannot breach. The security chief's words were cut off as alarms began blaring throughout the station. Emergency lights bathed the chamber in red illumination, while automated systems announced hull breaches in sectors that should have been nowhere near the Judgment Chamber. Damage reports. Zitkar commanded. Multiple hull breaches on decks 17 through 23 came the response from the station's central computer. Cause unknown. No weapons fire detected. The breaches appear to have originated from inside the station. Dr. Ihena's gaseous form swirled with agitation. Impossible. There are no explosive devices on those decks, no stored energy weapons, no chemical reactants capable of... You still don't get it, interrupted the voice from below, now carrying clearly through the station's communication system. I'm not trapped down here with you. You're trapped up there with me. And I've had cycles to figure out how this body works. The iris portal began to cycle open. Emergency containment. Zitkar shouted. Override all systems. Maintain the seal. But the portal continued to open, its massive segments retracting despite every automated safety protocol and manual override. Through the widening gap, bioluminescent patterns became visible in the depths, patterns that no longer resembled anything from the drake's natural coloration. Instead, they formed words and symbols, human writing spelled out in living light across scales the size of dinner plates. "You made two mistakes," the entity said, its voice now emerging directly from the portal rather than through the communication system. "First, you thought death would stop me. Second, you thought I came here alone." The lights throughout the chamber died completely, leaving only the eerie bioluminescence from below to provide illumination. In that alien glow, shapes began to move in the shadows. Impossible shapes that suggested human forms, but moved with predatory grace that belonged to no terrestrial species. "You see," Sarah's voice continued conversationally, "humans believe in something you'll never understand. We believe in justice. And justice, as you're about to learn, is not just about punishing the guilty. It's about protecting the innocent." The shapes in the shadows resolved into clearer forms. Human figures wearing the tattered remains of Earth Defense Force uniforms, but moving within human speed and agility. Their eyes burned with the same inner fire that had appeared in Sarah's image, and their hands had been replaced by appendages that resembled metallic claws. The hull breaches weren't random. Elder Kithra realized with growing horror. "You've been calling them, summoning them." "Every human who died in the void between stars," Sarah confirmed. "Every survivor who was hunted down and killed. Every soul that cried out for justice as they died. They heard me calling from the spaces between atoms, and they answered." The assembled delegates scrambled for the chamber's exits, but found their way blocked by more of the impossible human figures. These moved with the coordination of a pack, but their eyes held intelligence and purpose that spoke of military training and tactical awareness. "We are the impossible," Sarah's voice echoed from everywhere, and nowhere, carried by the station's own systems turned against their creators. "We are the dead who refuse to die quietly. We are humanity's answer to your tyranny." Ambassador Zethkar activated his personal emergency beacon, hoping to summon aid from the fleet stationed around the council complex. Instead of the familiar acknowledgement tone, he heard only Sarah's laughter echoing through the communication channels. "Oh, Ambassador," her voice whispered directly into his auditory processors, "you should have let us die with dignity. Instead, you made it personal. Now you get to learn what happens when you give humans time to think, time to plan, and absolutely nothing left to lose." The last thing Zethkar saw before the lights went out completely was the massive head of Zerath Mol rising through the portal. But the eyes that looked back at him burned with human intelligence, human fury, and human determination to see justice served, no matter the cost. The Galactic Council's administrative station hung in space like a dying star, its once pristine hull marked by the scars of internal explosions and system failures. Emergency beacons pulsed uselessly into the void, their distress signals carrying news that would reshape the galaxy's understanding of life, death, and the true nature of human determination. In the command center of the approaching rescue fleet, Admiral Orcs of the Hegemony Navy studied the tactical displays with growing unease. His ships had been dispatched to investigate the sudden communication blackout from the Council station, expecting to find evidence of equipment malfunction or perhaps a coordinated terrorist attack. What they found instead defied every principle of physics and biology that had governed galactic civilization for millennia. "Sensor report," he commanded, his mandibles clicking with nervous energy. "Sir," his tactical officer replied, "we're detecting massive energy anomalies throughout the station's hull. The patterns suggest some form of directed energy weapon, but the origin points are inconsistent with any known technology." Clarify: inconsistent. "The energy discharges appear to originate from inside the station's life support systems, sir, as though the environmental controls themselves have been weaponized. Additionally, we're detecting biological signatures that don't match any species in our databases." Admiral Korex studied the readouts with professional interest that was slowly giving way to concern. In 40 years of military service, he had never encountered a tactical situation that violated fundamental physical laws. Energy weapons required power sources, targeting systems, and physical launching platforms. They did not simply manifest spontaneously within sealed environmental systems. Biological signatures. Specify. Unknown, sir. The computer classifies them as humanoid, but the energy patterns are wrong. They're registering as both living and non-living simultaneously. The sensors can't determine whether we're looking at organic beings or some form of technological construct. The Admiral's compound eyes focused on the visual display showing the station's exterior. At first glance, it appeared structurally intact despite the numerous hull breaches. But as he watched, he began to notice disturbing details. The damage patterns weren't random. They formed symbols, letters from the extinct human language carved into the station's hull by some impossible force. Justice, he read aloud, recognizing the primitive script from his intelligence briefings. Remember, Sarah, vengeance. Sir, his communications officer interrupted. We're receiving a transmission from the station. From whom? Unknown, sir. The signal is using our own communication protocols, but it's originating from areas of the station that should be completely depressurized. And, sir, the voice is speaking in the human language. Admiral Corex felt the cold touch of something approaching fear as he authorized the transmission. The voice that emerged from his speakers was unmistakably human, young, female, and carrying an edge of controlled fury that made his exoskeleton crawl. Attention Hegemony Fleet. This is Lieutenant Sarachon of the Earth Defense Force. You will maintain your current position and prepare to receive a message for transmission to every world in the galaxy. The Admiral's tactical training reasserted itself over his growing unease. Unknown entity, you are aboard a secure Galactic Council facility without authorization. Identify yourself and explain your presence. Laughter emerged from the speakers. Human laughter, but somehow wrong, as though it were being produced by vocal cords that had never been designed for human speech. Oh, Admiral Corex, I think you know exactly who I am. Your people executed me 7 cycles ago, fed me to your pet dragon, and broadcast my death across the galaxy as a warning to other rebellious species. Surprise, I got better. The human terrorist Sarah, Chun, was executed and consumed by the Void Drake. Her consciousness was destroyed along with her physical form. You keep telling yourself that, Admiral. Maybe it'll help you sleep better tonight. Assuming you survive the next few hours, of course. The transmission cut to static, replaced immediately by new alarm signals from the station. The rescue fleet's sensors registered massive power fluctuations throughout the facility, accompanied by structural changes that seemed to defy the laws of physics. Corridors were reconfiguring themselves, sealed bulkheads were developing new openings, and the station's gravity generators were creating impossible spatial anomalies. Sir, the sensor operator reported, the station appears to be growing. Admiral Corex leaned forward in his command chair, studying the tactical display. The station's superstructure was indeed expanding, but not through any technological process he could identify. New sections were simply materializing, appearing as solid matter in areas that had previously contained only vacuum. The additions followed no rational design principle, instead forming organic-looking protrusions that resembled bone or carapace more than conventional construction. How was that possible? Unknown, sir. Matter doesn't spontaneously generate. Even our most advanced construction techniques require raw materials and energy input. This appears to be direct conversion of nothing into something. Through the expanding structure, lights began to appear. Not the clean illumination of standard galactic technology, but the warm, golden glow that had characterized human habitats. The new sections were taking on the appearance of Earth architecture, complete with details that could only have come from human memory and imagination. Admiral, came Sarah's voice again, now carrying clearly through their ship's own internal communication system despite having no technological connection to the station. I think it's time we had a proper conversation. I have some things to show you. The main tactical display flickered and changed, displaying not sensor readings, but what appeared to be a direct visual feed from inside the station. Admiral Corex found himself looking at a scene that challenged his understanding of reality itself. The station's sterile corridors had been transformed into something resembling a human city. Streets paved with metal from the station's hull stretched between buildings that grew from the walls like organic structures. Humans moved through these impossible spaces, men and women wearing the uniforms of the extinct Earth Defense Force, but moving with predatory grace that spoke of fundamental changes in their nature. Welcome to New Terra, Sarah's voice announced. Population: every human who died screaming in the void while your people hunted us for sport. We've been busy. The view shifted, showing vast chambers where impossible machinery hummed with energy that registered on no known scanner. The devices appear to be constructed from a mixture of salvaged galactic technology and materials that looked disturbingly organic. Humans worked alongside beings that might once have been human, but had been changed by forces beyond conventional understanding. You wanted to know how this is possible? Sarah continued. The answer is simple. You taught us to hate perfectly, completely, without reservation. And it turns out that perfect hatred, combined with human stubbornness and a really good understanding of quantum mechanics, can accomplish some truly impressive things. Admiral Corex forced himself to focus on practical concerns rather than the philosophical implications of what he was witnessing. What do you want? Justice, Admiral. Pure, absolute justice for every crime your people committed against mine. But first, I want you to deliver a message to every world in the galaxy. I want them to understand exactly what they're dealing with. The display changed again, showing scenes from across the galaxy. Human settlements that had been thought completely destroyed were rebuilding themselves, but the survivors who emerged from hidden bunkers and secret facilities were no longer entirely human. They moved with inhuman coordination. Their eyes burned with inner fire, and they displayed technological capabilities that seemed to transcend the laws of physics. We didn't just survive your genocide, Sarah explained. We evolved. We adapted. We became something new. And now we're coming for every species that participated in our extinction. The tactical displays around Admiral Corex began showing similar anomalies at locations throughout the galaxy. Energy signatures that matched the station's impossible readings were appearing at sites that corresponded to former human colonies. Dead worlds that had been sterilized cycles ago were suddenly registering massive biological activity. Impossible, he whispered. The dead cannot return. You keep using that word, Sarah's voice replied with amusement. I don't think it means what you think it means. The dead can't return? Admiral, you literally fed me to a monster designed to consume souls, and I'm having a pleasant conversation with you. Maybe it's time to revise your definition of impossible. Through the viewports of his flagship, Admiral Corex could see the station continuing its impossible growth. New structures were appearing faster now, taking on the form of massive weapons that had never existed in any galactic database. Energy patterns swirled around the transformed facility like controlled stellar phenomena. The Draconis Empire, the Velkarn Collective, the Silicon Hegemony, and all the other species that cheered when you burned our world, Sarah continued, her voice taking on a harder edge. They're going to learn what it feels like to be hunted. They're going to experience the terror of knowing that something is coming for them, something that can't be reasoned with, can't be bought off, and absolutely will not stop until justice is served. Your species is extinct, Admiral Corex stated with desperate authority. Even if some individuals survived, you lack the resources for galactic warfare. Resources? Sarah laughed. Admiral, we are the resources. Every human consciousness that was consumed by your void drakes, every soul that was torn apart by your weapons, every mind that screamed for justice as it died, they all heard me calling from the spaces between atoms. And they answered. The station's transformation accelerated, its organic growth taking on patterns that resembled a massive neural network. Corridors pulsed with bioluminescent energy, and the entire structure began to emit frequencies that caused Admiral Corex's crew to report headaches and disorientation. We are connected now in ways your species could never understand. We share memories, experiences, knowledge. We are individuals and a collective simultaneously. We are the ghost of humanity, risen from the grave to collect a debt written in blood and paid in screams. Through the impossible architecture of the transformed station, Admiral Corex could see movement, thousands of beings that had once been human, but were now something else. They moved with perfect coordination, working on projects that seemed to bend reality around them through pure force of will. Your message, he said finally, recognizing that resistance was pointless. What do you want transmitted? Simple, Sarah replied. Tell them that Sarah Chun and the ghost of humanity are coming. Tell them that death is not the end of the story. Tell them that justice delayed is not justice denied. And, Admiral, yes. Tell them that this is what happens when you make genocide personal. The transmission ended, leaving Admiral Corex staring at a station that no longer resembled anything built by galactic civilization. It had become something else entirely, a fusion of technology and impossible biology, a monument to human determination that existed in violation of every natural law. As his fleet prepared to carry the message to every corner of the galaxy, Admiral Corex understood that they were witnessing the birth of something unprecedented. Humanity had not simply survived its extinction. It had transcended it, becoming something that would haunt the galaxy's nightmares until justice was finally served. One standard year had passed since Admiral Corex transmitted Sarah Chin's message to the galaxy, and the universe had fundamentally changed. What had begun as isolated incidents of impossible phenomena had evolved into a systematic transformation of galactic civilization that defied every principle of physics, politics, and philosophy that had governed interstellar society for millennia. On the capital world of the Draconis Empire, Elder Kithra stood in her private observatory, watching the stars with eyes that had witnessed the rise and fall of 100 lesser civilizations. But tonight, the stars themselves seemed different. Where once the void between worlds had been empty space, now it pulsed with currents of energy that registered on no scanner, but could be felt by every sentient mind sensitive enough to perceive them. The humans had not come as conquerors in the traditional sense. They had not arrived with fleets of warships or armies of soldiers. Instead, they had simply begun to exist wherever they chose to be, materializing from the quantum foam with the same casual inevitability as gravity or entropy. And wherever they appeared, reality itself seemed to bend around their absolute conviction that justice must be served. "Ma'am," came the voice of her aide, a young Draconis warrior whose scales had not yet darkened with age. "The morning reports have arrived." Elder Kithra accepted the data crystal without turning away from the viewport. The reports had become a daily ritual of impossible news, each more disturbing than the last. Species that had participated enthusiastically in humanity's extinction were discovering that their past actions carried consequences that transcended death itself. Summarize the key points. The Velkarn Collective has formally requested emergency protection from the Galactic Council. 3 of their core worlds have been visited by human entities. No violence was reported, but the Velkarn leadership claims their liquid metal consciousness was temporarily invaded by what they describe as memories of burning children and dying mothers. The Elder's ancient claws scraped against the crystal display as she absorbed this information. The Velkarn were among the galaxy's most advanced technological species, their distributed consciousness existing across vast networks of liquid metal that could be reconfigured at will. The idea that human minds could somehow interface with their exotic neural substrate suggested capabilities that violated fundamental principles of biology. Continue. The Silicon Hegemony has abandoned their mining operations in the Proxima system. Survey teams reported that their drilling equipment began producing sounds that resembled human voices crying for help. When they investigated, they found that the excavated or had arranged itself into patterns spelling out the names of human children. Elder Kithra closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her species' ancient dignity pressing down upon her like a physical force. The Draconis had prided themselves on their pragmatic approach to galactic politics. When the Council had decided to make an example of humanity, her people had seen it as a logical demonstration of superior force. The strong ruled, the weak served, and those who refused to accept this natural order were eliminated. They had not anticipated that the weak might find ways to become something other than weak. The Korthani Collective reports structural changes to their crystalline matrix cities. The changes appear to be autonomous, with their living crystal infrastructure rearranging itself to display human architectural patterns. Most disturbing, the modifications seem to improve efficiency and functionality, as though human design principles were somehow superior to their own. And the core worlds? The Galactic Council has been relocated to a mobile command platform after the administrative station was transformed. The entity that claims to be Sarah Chun has established what she calls the Embassy of the Dead in the station's remains. Representatives from 17 species have requested audiences with her, seeking to negotiate some form of peace treaty. The old warrior turned away from the viewport, her massive form moving with the careful dignity of extreme age. In her private chambers, holographic displays showed the latest intelligence reports from across the galaxy. The picture they painted was one of systematic, inexorable change that followed no logical pattern accept the human concept of proportional justice. Species that had been enthusiastic supporters of humanity's extinction faced the most severe manifestations. Worlds that had cheered the destruction of Earth found their own children experiencing vivid dreams of human families dying in orbital bombardments. Military commanders who had personally led hunting expeditions against human survivors discovered that their tactical displays now occasionally showed phantom human ships that could not be destroyed, but made their presence known through quantum interference patterns. The transformations were not random or chaotic. They were precisely calculated to force each guilty species to experience a fraction of what humanity had endured. Fear without violence, loss without death, the slow, grinding realization that nowhere in the galaxy could provide sanctuary from consequences that transcended physical law. Ma'am, her aide continued hesitantly. There is one more report. Personal rather than official. Speak. My clutch sister serves aboard a deep space patrol vessel. She reports that crew members have begun experiencing shared dreams. Visions of human females in military uniforms, standing in empty corridors that exist nowhere on their ship. The humans don't speak or threaten. They simply observe with expressions of profound sadness. Elder Kithra felt something cold settle in her ancient hearts. The Draconis had been among the most efficient hunters during the final purges of human survivors. Their superior technology and ruthless tactics had accounted for nearly 40% of confirmed human deaths in the years following Earth's destruction. If the ghosts of humanity were beginning to manifest aboard their military vessels, convene an emergency session of the War Council, she commanded, and prepare a communication for transmission to the Embassy of the Dead. Mom, it appears we need to speak with Sarah Chan. The transmission took 3 standard hours to prepare, each word carefully chosen to convey respect without admitting weakness, acknowledgement without accepting blame. When it was finally sent to the impossible structure that had once been the Galactic Council's administrative station, the response came within minutes. Elder Kithra. Sarah's voice carried clearly through the communication system, but now it held harmonics that suggested multiple speakers talking in perfect unison. I was wondering when you'd call. Sarah Chun. I am reaching out to discuss the activities of your people throughout Draconis space. Activities. The word carried amusement that somehow managed to sound both human and entirely alien. You mean the justice being administered to war criminals who thought death would protect them from consequences? Your people are extinct. This conversation is impossible. And yet here we are having it. You know, that's been the theme of this entire experience. Everyone keeps insisting that what we're doing is impossible, right up until we do it. Death is impossible to overcome. Consciousness cannot exist without biological substrate. The past cannot reach into the present to demand justice. All impossible until suddenly it isn't. Through the communication link, Elder Kithra could hear sounds that belonged to no technological system she recognized. Voices singing in harmony, but the voices numbered in the thousands and were all unmistakably human. Underlying the singing was something that sounded like machinery, but organic machinery that pulsed with rhythm of a massive heartbeat. What do you want from us? Justice, Elder. Pure, absolute justice for every human life your people took. For every child who died screaming when your ships bombed refugee settlements. For every mother who watched her family burn while your soldiers laughed. For every father who was tortured to reveal the locations of hidden survivors. We followed the orders of the Galactic Council. The humans were designated as hostile insurgents. Oh, Elder Kithra. The voice carried a note of profound disappointment. You're going to try the just following orders defense? Really? After everything your species has witnessed, after all the impossible things we've shown you, you're still going to pretend that authority absolves responsibility. The communication channel filled with new sounds, the voices of humans speaking in their ancient language, but somehow the words carried meaning that transcended translation. They spoke of loss and pain and determination that would not be broken by death itself. We offer surrender, the elders said finally. Full acknowledgement of our crimes against your species. Reparations to be negotiated. Complete withdrawal from human space. Human space. Sarah's laughter carried harmonics of 10,000 voices, each finding their own note of bitter amusement. Elder, there is no human space anymore. There is no human government to negotiate with. There are no human leaders to accept your surrender. There are only ghosts seeking justice for crimes that echo across the quantum foam. Then, what would you have us do? Remember, learn. Teach your children about the species you helped destroy. Make sure that every generation of Draconis knows the story of humanity's last stand, knows the names of the humans who died rather than kneel, knows the price of following orders without questioning their morality. The communication link shifted, and suddenly, Elder Kithara found herself looking at holographic images that filled her private chamber. Human families on Earth before the bombardment, children playing in parks under alien stars, soldiers dying with Earth Defense Force battle cries on their lips. The images were impossibly detailed, as though they had been recorded by someone who had been present for every moment. This is memory, Elder. Perfect, eternal memory preserved in the spaces between atoms. Every human who ever lived, every moment of joy and sorrow and hope and fear. We are the repository of an entire species experience, and we will not allow that experience to be forgotten. And if we comply, if we remember and teach and acknowledge what was done, then your species will live. Your children will grow up knowing that justice exists, that actions have consequences that transcend death, that the universe itself remembers when the innocent are murdered. You will become better than you were. And if we refuse, the holographic images changed, showing scenes from throughout Draconis space. Military installations where impossible phenomena had begun manifesting. Civilian populations experiencing shared dreams of human suffering. Entire star systems where the laws of physics had begun to bend around the collective will of the dead. Then you will learn what it feels like to be hunted by something that cannot be killed, cannot be reasoned with, and absolutely will not stop until justice is served. The choice is yours, Elder Kithara. Justice willingly embraced, or justice inexorably enforced. The transmission ended, leaving the ancient warrior alone with thoughts that felt too large for her mind to contain. Outside her viewport, the stars continued to pulse with energies that belonged to no known science. In the depths of space, impossible structures grew from quantum foam and void, monuments to human determination that existed in defiance of every natural law. The galaxy had executed a human girl and fed her to their dragon beast. In return, they had received something far worse than war or conquest. They had received justice itself, personified and empowered and absolutely determined to balance the cosmic scales. And in the embassy that existed where the administrative station had once been, Sarachun and the ghost of humanity continued their patient work of teaching the galaxy that some debts could never be escaped, only acknowledged, and atoned for across the generations that would remember what happened when justice was delayed, but never denied. The universe itself had become haunted by human determination, and it would remain so until every species understood that the strong had responsibilities to the weak, that power carried the obligation to protect rather than exploit, and that somewhere in the quantum foam between stars, the ghosts of the innocent were always watching, always remembering, always ready to ensure that justice was finally served.